Hello team and welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MSP. This is Ukraine War News Update for the 21st of September 2023, the first part thereof. So much data for me to wade through at the moment. That's why I'm a little bit later again today. You know, when you've got the UN meeting, when you've got all the military aid packages and discussions coming out of that, and when you've got as much stuff that's happening geopolitically as is going on now, it's, you know, goodness me, I could spend my entire day just head in different sources without actually saying anything about it. Right. So let's go to where we normally start. Ukrainian general staff figures for the Russian losses for the day before. All the usual caveats apply. Find those caveats in my description below. And there are some pretty heavy numbers for the Russians, again, in the categories that we generally expect. 490 personnel lost yesterday. That's pretty much where it's been over the last few months, give or take some ups and downs here and there. 3 tanks, okay, not a huge loss for the Russians there, but 15 armored personnel vehicles is fairly significant. That's a number that is going to hurt them if you lose 15 of those a day. I mean, if that's the British Armed Forces, we'll be out of APVs in about 2 weeks. No, but you get my point. They are losing, 8,833 as according to the General Staff. Obviously, some of those would just be damaged and will be reparable and back on the front lines, but yeah, you get the idea. And then, wow, 41 artillery systems, artillery pieces lost the day before. That is a behemoth number. Now, always the question about accuracy, a question about how many of those are damaged and fully taken out. But even if you take, well, some analysts suggest taking 20% off gets you to a realistic number. But even if you took 40% off, you're getting to a really high loss statistic again, or still. So that is absolutely a phenomenal statistic there. 2 multiple launch rocket systems, 2 anti-aircraft warfare systems. Those will be sore losses for the Russians. They are losing a fair number of anti-aircraft warfare systems. We are seeing things like Books and OSAs being taken out. That might include systems in Crimea because there were some strikes on Crimea last night. Not sure, but there are claims that air defense systems were targeted. UAV, so drones, 29. That won't be from last night, the night before. There was a massive barrage, cruise missile barrage last night. Talk about that. 37 vehicles and fuel tanks. We'll have a little chat about the Bukankas, the loaf van that they use. They are taking some hits with those. And 5 pieces of special equipment, might be anything from excavators to comms, intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance, so on and so forth. Right, we go to Oryx, the aggregator visually confirmed losses. 20 Russian losses compared to 13 Ukrainian. So that's approaching parity, more than we have seen over the last few days, where it's been really in favor of the Ukrainians. Let's have a little look at the breakdown here. So a high number of BMP, so infantry fighting vehicles, 11 out of the 20, so that's over half. Then we got an OSA SAM, I was talking about an OSA, and an S-400 launcher as well. I think that's the one that I showed you the video footage of yesterday that was added on. That was an unknown loss. That's not going to be in the last 24 hours. Su-34 strike aircraft, I presume that's the one that was lost due to malfunction in near Voronezh in Russia, and then a few other bits and pieces, artillery there. Ukrainians, what they lost? Well, a few tanks, actually 4 tanks, so 4 out of 13. That's quite a heavy proportion there. And then a couple of drones, smoke regenerator, so not hugely problematic, although 4 tanks isn't great. So I think that's in favour of the Russians here. Now, unfortunately, yesterday's Andrew Perpetua's loss statistics came out much later in my recording, so I couldn't include them. They were, I can't remember, were they approaching parity a little bit more? Anyway, today's ones, as you can see, are massively in favour of the Ukrainians. I mean, that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. There's probably a ratio of 8 to 1 there. Just really significant. And I think he says something about that. He said, these losses, these are losses I could identified today, it's a bit lopsided. There were videos where Russians claimed to destroy stuff, but I couldn't find any evidence anything was actually destroyed in those videos, mostly just blurry smoke. He's admitted that he actually searches out Russian videos to try and kind of overcome any kind of bias or make sure it's not too skewed in terms of selection bias. So I think he said like he looks at 2/3 Russian videos and then still comes out with these statistics. Anyway, what are we mainly seeing here? Well, IFVs, that fits in with what we saw in the general staff figures, quite high IFV losses, and a lot of trucks and civilian vehicles, which again fits in with 37 vehicles and fuel tanks being lost there. So that pretty much checks in, but artillery, just not a lot there compared to what the general staff is saying, and whether that is down to they had a conversation, him and Konstantin, on the live stream the other night, where they're talking about actually there's so much more footage out there than anyone gets to see. And so when you're seeing this footage, he says that I speak to people and they got 10 to 15 videos that they've got that they haven't uploaded that they could show you. Konstantin himself, who's someone who actually uploads this stuff himself, says that he's got so much stuff he doesn't upload. So there isn't going to be a strict correlation in terms of both category representation and just overall numbers of videos that you see on the socials and the claims that are being made by, for example, the general staff. So anyway, that's at a T90, another T90M added there. They are losing those high value tanks quite consistently. For the Ukrainians, nothing really to mention in what is listed there. Now, Trentelenko says, I talked a lot about how the Russians are reaching into their economy for the Euro-Loaf Scooby-Doo vans to replace tactical trucks, and that will result in a demotorization of the Russian economy. So in other words, you don't have these vans in the Russian economy because you're taking them out and piling them into the war effort. I don't think it's going to be that bad. I'm sure there's plenty of vans in Russia that you could dip into without really affecting the Russian economy. However, there are issues with the amount of these vehicles that are being destroyed. Russian Telegram is saying that due to a shortage of loaves, the price is going up and they can't find them to crowdfund. Yes, they're running low of Scooby-Doo vans, he says. And then someone, this is a question that I think many of you have asked. I've asked it myself. I don't get it. If Russia's losing so badly, then why is Ukraine advancing so slowly? And David D, and take this with a pinch of salt, of course, it's just an opinion from someone who has some military experience, but is just, fairly much at random. They don't need to advance right now. Russia is coming out of a defensive positions and letting Ukrainian infantry kill them. In the last few days, word is out there that the 70th, 72nd, 83rd, 22nd, 31st, 200th, 247th, 100th, 51st, 104th brigades or regiments are no longer combat effective. And that is just in the south. Russia is losing about 1 to 2 brigades a day now. Prisoners of war, killed in action, missing in action, wounded in action. So someone else says a brigade a day. Is that like 2,000 people? And counting wounded in action, killed in action, POWs, yes, about that. People are only counting KIAs right now, and many of the brigades are nowhere near 2,000 men anymore anyway. So there is a conversation, to be had around these kind of losses and this is coming out of the conversation to do with Scooby-Doo vans being, fairly scarce at the moment because they're being attrited at such huge numbers. Right. This is a bit of drone footage. I'm going to show you this. There's nothing dodgy of this footage. So YouTube, if you're listening, this is perfectly fine. But it shows the skills with which these drone operators are using their drones, flying their drones. And it's pretty significant bit of artillery going on with this. This is a first-person drone, but obviously it's a pretty hot area. And basically it flies. It's missing out all these branches that are sticking out, flies over them and around them and whatnot, really successfully, coming in and then going into a small foxhole. So you can see it there. It's being observed by another drone. And then it just flies into that tiny little hole there and explodes. I mean, whether it did significant enough damage or not, I don't know. but it's a fact that these are pretty skilled operators. Right. Talking about losses, I've shared with you these every day. There's so many of these Russian first-person accounts coming out. Russian artillery finishes off their own once again. Akhmat and Storm Z, so that's the Chechen special forces, although they're not actually, they're mainly non-Chechen fighters, I think, that are making up those units. But nevertheless, Akhmat and Storm Z, so those are penal units, tried to attack the positions of the armed forces of Ukraine. Ukrainians defended themselves with cluster ammo, mortars, tanks, and helicopters. A few units were able to reach the outskirts, but they were finished off by their own artillery. Several Moscow boys survived to share the story. So this is a story from a Russian. 800 meters, according to the postcard, to the ruins of the village. Another group of Storm Zers, so Storm Z men, was sent right in front of them, and then an assault squad from Akhmat. From the first group of Zetas of 4 dozen people, 7 returned. So that's 48 people, 7 return. You're losing that many. 41 out of 48 are killed in action, missing in action, wounded in action. The situation, or prisoners of war, the situation with the Akhmat assaults is similar, only there were more of them. Their group was abandoned almost completely, without proper introduction to the situation, without reconnaissance, without artillery support in the morning during daylight. They were covered with cassettes and mines. Tanks and helicopters attacked them. Only one small group managed to reach and get hold of the outskirts, and there it was covered by our suddenly awakened artillery. How those remaining on their feet from the group were able to still pull out some 300 people, including the commander, I don't know. I only know that they could. So, it's talking about huge losses, about friendly fire from the Russians, about how much the Ukrainians are using, artillery and tanks and helicopters and drones and a whole lot, and that the Russians are just losing a huge number of men in these attacks, and they are, without proper introduction to the situation. So the intel is poor, and they're not getting, not debriefed, but briefed before they go on these attacks. They're just like sent in mindlessly, is the claim. Right, we're going to now get onto distance strikes, and it was a huge night last night. It was a huge night for 2 things. First of all, it was the single biggest attack on Crimea using drones and rockets or missiles, and whether it's a retaliation or not, I don't know. Probably not, but it coincided with Russia having the biggest cruise missile attack on Ukraine that we've seen for a long time. I talked about recently how I'm sure they're stockpiling their missiles for larger attacks, and that seems to be exactly what has taken place. So let's go to the Ukrainian attack first, because it happened chronologically earlier than the Russian attack. So Russian occupiers are very nervous in Ukrainian Crimea. So this was at the time. Local media report that Crimea suffered the most massive drone attack of all time. Residents of Yevpatoria, Jankoy, Balaklava, Sevastopol, Saki, Novofedorivka, and other cities report the sounds of work of the air defense. Now, that was important because actually it talks about a couple of air bases, or Sevastopol naval base. You've got Saki air base. You've got Jankoy, which has a helicopter base, but it's also, I think, is also a logistical hub. So these are really high value targets being hit, or at least being aimed at. Locals report over 20 explosions in several cities of occupied Crimea. It may be the most massive kamikaze drone attack on Russia's military infrastructure in Crimea since the beginning of the full-scale Russian invasion, and that was last night. Well, it hadn't finished by then. Crimea aren't ready for this. The swarm of drones that flew from Henichesk in the direction of Strelka for 10 minutes is approximately estimated over 40 units by the sound of them. And that was just in one area. The Russian Ministry of Defense reports that 19 Ukrainian drones were destroyed over the Black Sea and Crimea, and 1 each over the Kursk, Belgorod, and Oryol regions. So not only that, but sent also into Russia proper there. Breaking news from last night again: Ukrainian armed forces conducting one of the most massive drone attacks, residents of several cities. So again, lots of video footage to support this. Now, smoke appears to be coming from the out of the site of Verkhnokh-Zadove near Sevastopol, where located is a protected command post and special receiving radio center of the Russian Black Sea Fleet. maybe, just maybe, the Ukrainians managed to strike another important target. Now, there were also, this was also from yesterday as well, so there were Storm Shadow missile attacks during the day yesterday on Crimea, and then a massive one in the evening. So even during the day, it was suggested that there were really high value targets hit. Now, okay. Special services report that initially the airfield, I think this is Saki airfield, was attacked by large numbers of drones to overload the enemy's defense. That was then targeted by Neptune missiles. Right, on these Neptune missiles, there's all this talk about ATACMS not being given to Ukraine. I'm wondering whether part of this might have something to do with them being able to make their own indigenous missiles. Now, Neptune missiles were originally anti-ship missiles that have been tinkered with and are now used as kind of long-distance missiles. Whether the US has helped Ukraine to design and manufacture these missiles so they can make them themselves and then fire them into wherever they want to. You had John Kirby saying no to ATACMS, but just before that, he was saying Ukraine can use weapons as they wish. So maybe he was actually kind of talking about Neptunes, and Neptunes might become a central part of the Ukrainian long-range offensive capability. Last night, the SBU and the Navy launched a large-scale attack on the Saki military airfield in Crimea, Novofedorivka. According to Ukrainian media sources, the SBU at the airfield there were at least 12 combat aircraft, so Su-24s and Su-30s, as well as a Pantsir air defense system. There was also a training base for the Mojahir drone operators. So those are your Shahed ones. It is these drones that the Russians use to coordinate their own air attacks and also as combat strike drones. The strikes of the SBU and the Navy hit the target and caused serious damage to the equipment of the occupiers. We don't know really the details of the damage yet. It's still too early. To defeat the enemy, drones were used, which overloaded Russian air defenses. Neptune missiles were then used. Russian Telegram channels confirmed serious destruction and losses, but a bit vague. They report about at least 30 killed military personnel. And they will be, I presume, Air Force personnel, which would be pretty significant. It's believed that Ukraine damaged a number of Russian planes and air defense system, but we're waiting proper details of that. So there could be much more widespread damage than just that airbase. Lots of places hit over Crimea. Whether we find out exactly what was hit over the next 24 hours or not, I don't know. But then the Russians sent out a wave of 43 cruise missiles. Now, this is still not back up to where we saw it at the peak of their attacks on the energy infrastructure last year. Last autumn, we were seeing waves of Russian missiles to the tune, well, we saw 120 drone and missiles sent in one wave, if I remember correctly. So 43 is a third of that. So if they've been stockpiling, I think this again shows that they just aren't able to manufacture the missiles at the rate that they need. Official numbers from the Ukrainian Air Force is that 43 were sent from strategic bombers, 36 were shot down. Now, if they were all launched from strategic bombers, then that also says something else, because the latest we hear is that all the submarines have been pulled out of Sevastopol to Novorossiysk. That's showing that the hits on Sevastopol have had an operational effect on the Russian Navy, and that they are not part of this wave of cruise missiles hitting Ukraine, I think might be significant. Anyway, in addition to that, as is usually the case, Russia also attacked Kharkiv with S-300 missiles. And they take a ballistic trajectory and much harder to shoot down, but they are not so accurate. Right. Although this isn't relevant to the strikes last night, this was actually from the strikes on Lviv, where a warehouse was blown out up to 2 nights ago, if you remember. It may even be 3 nights ago now. Yesterday, so this is not yet. Actually, the day before, Russian drone attack at Lviv warehouse killed 32-year-old Petro Burban. I just wanted to remind you of the human cost to these. So where I believe the Ukrainians are really trying hard to target Russian military installations, not only for the moral reason, but they also have limited resources. And with those limited resources, they need to make them count. So sending, drones and missiles into Crimea to hit residential buildings or like a random commercial warehouse is not useful for them. It's not only is it not morally acceptable, but also it's not a good use of their limited munitions. Now, Russia, I think, have limited munitions too, but are just using them stupidly and have done since the beginning of the war. And I think at the beginning of the war, they probably thought, hey, we've got more missiles that you can poke a hairy stick at. So we're going to just send them all. And yeah, if they hit stuff that we don't intend them to hit, we're not too bothered because, hey, we don't care if we kill civilians. But also, we might well be aiming at civilian infrastructure as well. We're certainly aiming at energy infrastructure that affects civilians, and then civilians will die. Well, here's the human cost of the Russian approach. So it was the first day on his new job, and he recently returned home from the front line where he'd just spent 1.5 years defending Ukraine. Goes home, gets a job in a warehouse after, being at war for 1.5 years, and then he's killed in a drone attack. At least, that's a narrative that's presented here. Leaves behind a wife and 3 kids. Just desperately sad. Okay. Russia attacked Ukraine with dozens of missiles from different directions, according to Yuri Ihnat from the Air Force. Seems that Russia launched a winter campaign to destroy the remaining infrastructure. And they say this because Rivne was out power because I think energy infrastructure was hit. Explosions were heard in Khmelnytsky. So this is important because there's the airbase where they launch the Su-24 bombers the Su-24Ms that drop the Storm Shadow and Scalp cruise missiles. So this is commonly a target for the Russians. Whether anything got through, I don't know. You would expect, I hope, that the Ukrainians would have put some of their best air defenses around there by now. I mean, the Russians have got through before, and there have been some airframe losses there. Okay. Air raid warnings are only just being turned off in some regions after a big missile attack, said Tim White at 6:40 this morning. So it was a pretty long attack. The worst incident was in Cherkasy, where a hotel was destroyed, and apparently there are still 20 people under the rubble there. Many injured there too. So Cherkasy, again, was that a military installation? It doesn't seem that a military installation was hit. As you can see from the footage there. In the village of Vishnevoye near Kiev, a plant producing Pepsi drink was destroyed as a result of a missile attack. Well, it's a weird irony there, maybe. I mean, Pepsi's still, I think, operational in Russia. Is that not right? So, I don't know. Bit of a shot in the foot there for Russia, maybe, if they've targeted Pepsi installation. I presume they didn't target that on purpose. If they did, waste of a missile, or it's an installation doing something other than producing Pepsi, but I doubt that. Officials have released pictures and this video from Rivne, the scene of another missile attack overnight. Civilian infrastructure building was hit, causing a fire to break out in a service station. And so Rivne now didn't have any power this morning. You can see that here something was blown up. Whether that was worthwhile, the Russians blowing up, whether it was a decent enough high value target, or whether it's just another example of using a missile on something without too much military utility, I don't know. And then there's been a large fire in occupied Donetsk, a thermal power plant, DTEK Zuvska, in the Donetsk region. I presume this is occupied Donetsk, and I don't know whether this has been struck by Ukrainians in a kind of tit-for-tat energy infrastructure strike, or whether this is sabotage, or whether it's an accident. I don't know, but that could be a significant blow for the occupying forces. Now, just to add something to, thanks to one of my viewers who pointed this out to me in one of my threads yesterday, that I haven't said anything about Romania extending a no-fly zone on the Ukrainian border. I didn't know anything about this. So if we go to my map, we should see that places like Reni and Izmail are very close to the Ukrainian border, and they've been targeted by drones. Targeted by drones from the Russians in an attempt to completely take out the Ukrainian ability to store and transport wheat. So this is down here in the south of Ukraine. So I haven't covered it in blue yet. But we have Reni there and Ishmael. So let's see how far from the Ukrainian border that is. Well, that's 7 kilometers to Reni, and Ishmael is where are you? Oh yeah, there you are. Is about 55 kilometers. So I'm just going to leave a 30-kilometer line there. Right, let's just go through this declaration. This is a couple of days old now. So the Ministry of National Defence of Romania has strengthened limits on aircraft and drone flights near to the border with Ukraine, extending the no-fly corridor out to 20 to 30 kilometers. In response to the increasing Russian attacks on Ukrainian ports, there was a necessity to enhance previously implemented measures. Ministry of Defence of Romania, remember Romania is part of NATO, announced on Thursday, September 14th. This will enable more effective monitoring and control of airspace usage. The airspace has been restricted to within a minimum 20 to 30 kilometers from the Ukrainian border, with a minimum altitude of 4,000 meters inside the prohibited area. The previous no-fly limit was set at only 8 kilometers along the Ukrainian border at a minimum altitude of 1,000 meters. The ministry clarified that these restrictions would not apply to civilian aircraft flights to and from Tulcea Danube Delta Airport area or to state aircraft and air transport. So the Ministry of Defence the Romanian one, has discovered wreckage that originated from Russian drones. The most recent discovery occurred on September 13th following a Russian attack. So I am trying to work out, I'm still not 100% sure whether this is a no-fly zone within Romania, in which case nothing's allowed to fly there or it would be shot down, which will allow them to shoot down any drone that crossed their border, or whether this is going into Ukraine to a depth of 30 kilometers, in which case they can shoot down anything that's approaching the Romanian border within Ukraine. Now, if anyone can help me out on this, that would be great, because if that's the case, then effectively Romania, and this is something I was saying that should be done, which should be pretty clever. If Romania did something like that, then they could help protect someone like Reni with NATO air defense systems. And that would be huge. But I don't know if that's what that actually means. So, yeah, I'd really be interested to know. Anyway, going on to other bits and pieces, not too much remaining for this video. Right, notable development. I'm not doing a frontline update segment for my news video this morning. I'm doing a separate frontline video because there's just too much stuff to talk about otherwise. Notable development. After weeks of mostly small-scale dismounted infantry assaults, it looks like Ukraine's 82nd Air Assault Brigade is assaulting with armor again towards Verbove, past the anti-tank obstacle line with strikers. So those are US armored personnel vehicles, but some of them do have offensive weapon capabilities on board. So it depends what version of the striker it is. Marders, infantry fighting vehicles, German ones. First time they've been seen to be, used offensively, and Max Pro MRAPs, at least I think it is. So Max Pro, they're fairly consistently used. Now this is significant because this is over the tank ditches and the Dragon's Teeth that presented an obstacle that we know the Ukrainians have got over. They have in control of not only this area of the tank ditches, but also an area of the manned trenches. But we hadn't seen yet in this area between the two trench lines any mechanized equipment. So the fact that the Ukrainians are now using this seems to indicate that they have upped their offense in that area. And here, so Defmon says that better view of the Vobovy section. I think the Ukrainians will continue to clear and follow the trenches into the east and south, slowly expanding their salient. Yeah, I totally agree. But it's just really interesting that they're now using these vehicles in so doing. And I just think that you might start seeing Verbove be the center of attention. Things might move a little quicker. I don't know whether that indicates that it's going to get a little bit more heated in this trench line area to the west of Verbove. So thought I'd pass that on. That I think is significant when you start seeing those being used. It's been exclusively infantry, particularly in this area where you've had tank ditches, exclusively kind of infantry activity, and it's why it's been slow and grinding. They have to, fight for every meter of the trenches, and the Russians, as we know, are defending with everything they possibly can. Now, the question is, how's it going, Russia? Is it going well for you? How do you think this whole war is going? I mean, you're still calling it special military operation, so it's obviously just a special military operation. How do you think it's going? Well, a proposal from the State Duma, the Russian parliament, quote, let's mobilize everyone who is unemployed goes to the front. We also need to return to Russia a 12 to 15 hour working day without days off. Ooh, so it's going well then. During the Great Patriotic War, no one asked questions. Women, children, and old people worked. In the end, we won, said Andrei Gurylyov, State Duma deputy from the United Russia and former lieutenant general. You've got a military parliamentarian here saying, I think everyone should be working crazy amounts, so get on a war footing. We need to be able to produce stuff. There's complaints that they want to up the production or output of military equipment, and they don't have the labor force to do that because they sent the whole labor force to war, and the rest of them have run away to other countries because they don't want to go to war. So they've got this labor shortage. So it's like, right, let's get women and children in there and old people. Women, children, and old people. Let's get them working 12 to 15 hour days. So that'll sort that out. And then everyone else, all the men who are unemployed, get them to the front line, and we don't have to pay unemployment benefit. Like we did with the convicts. We don't have to pay for their prison service and rehabilitation. Just send them to war and they'll probably die there. So that's his solution. The question is, how's it going, Russia? Going well? I'm not sure. Actually, I'm going very well. Right. Ukrainian gunners, this is just another random bit of footage I just wanted to show you, but I think it's indicative of how these jets have to fly. So this is a Su-24M, a jet we've been talking about actually, that fires the Storm Shadow missiles. Look how low it has to fly to stay as safe as possible, to stay out of radar acquisition. I mean, that is just above the trees. And we've seen this with helicopters, and we have seen jets flying low, of course, but that's the lowest I've seen a jet fly. Safety first, guys, safety first. Anyway, thank you so much for watching. Please like, subscribe, and share. Hopefully that was of some use and informative to at least another human being. Today is my Be an Honorary Kiwi Day, so kia kaha, my Kiwi brothers and sisters. Take care, and I'll speak to you. Just wearing a silver fern, so, a bit garish, but, a bit of Kiwiana for you there. Anyway, whatever. Take care. Speak soon.